Welcome back, folks. Back from news, another segment. We're on our third part of talking about your party. Will it be a party? Will it not be a party? But we're going to talk in terms of what kind of policy they might come out with. Joining me to go through this this segment, see what they might like to see your party produce. I have Liverpool Hillsborough Justice Campaign stalwart Sheila Coleman. I have Baker's Union legend, of course, President Ian Hodson. I have got NHS campaigner, filmmaker extraordinaire, Dr. Bob Gill, and another NHS activist and campaigner extraordinaire, Csergo. Welcome, all four of you, to this segment on what we're going to do, and what we're going to talk about, and what sort of thing your party might end up actually producing. Well, what would you like to see produced? So I suppose that's the best question I can really start with. I can start with yourself, Sheila, here. What sort of policies are actually, needed to restore dignity and bring unity together, and your party actually produce?
I think it's to get things into perspective and to stop what some might perceive as nitpicking over detail when there are issues that are affecting people's lives on a daily basis. So for me, it is about policies, it's about listening to people, and it's about listening to activists and campaigners who have spent so long and continue to spend time campaigning. For example, the NHS. I won't go into that because there's other people much better here to do that. But the issue is listen to the people and try and get people actively involved. But the way to do that is people have to think that what is the policies being put forward affect them directly. Not everyone is an activist. Not everyone is politically in tune with what is going on in the country. The media plays such a huge part in helping to form people's, the ordinary person's views. How do we get those people to get behind this party, which, let's face it, is being long needed and should have occurred a few years ago, and throw our weight behind it, because I think it's so important. I mean, last time I was saying this was Last Chance Saloon, but this is last chance saloon. And I think the key is to listen to what's being said and not to focus so in some aspects destructively on what is going on, the wrangling over the formation of the party. It's not easy, and I don't envy people, but somewhere along the line, someone's got to get a grip and take control. Getting a grip sounds good to me.
Ian Hodson, obviously workers' rights, big issue for yourself. What sort of policies would you like to see your party come out with in line with what your members need in this day and age?
I'd like to see détente, really, in your party. I think that would be a starting point. I think if we could get peace in our time, that would be the ideal place for us to be. But no, let's being serious. I think one of the problems is people think that it's all about leaders. The problem with leaders is they might lead us out of the desert, but some other leader might lead us back in. That's the reality of leaders. So I think policy is the key issue. What does it stand for? What does your party intend to do? I mean, from my perspective, yeah, you're right about trade union rights, but before we even get to the workplace, I would like to see people have a home. I think that if we build homes, we can build a much better country, a better society, stronger communities. And I think if those homes are not affordable homes where people have to, be earning such an amount of money to be able to get a mortgage, but a home that they can actually afford to live in, a council house. I think that was a good idea. I think that helped, stabilise, certainly after the Second World War, when we went on that mass council house building program. In fact, it was so good, even the Tories adopted it. I think they built more council housing than the Labour government before them. I mean, and the people felt a lot happier, didn't they? I mean, you know, all the way through the 50s, 60s, you know, 70s. I know the 70s is often portrayed as this terrible time for working class people. But I mean, I keep seeing these programs back in the 70s where people are going on holiday for the first time. You know, they're not having to worry about which charity to go to help them feed the family, because they can afford to do it all on the wages that they're on. And they've all got stable homes. In fact, so stable is the housing that they're coming from, they're now able to actually afford mortgages and put deposits down, and the wages cover them. I mean, today I think you've got about 10 times to 10 times your earnings just to get a start at home. So I mean, you know, I would like to see, you know, a party that really talks about the issues that will change people's lives, and giving people a decent start, to me, is a decent place to live.
Yeah.
Let's start with that. And how we're going to achieve it to make sure that people aren't left on the streets.
Social contract is broken, so restoration of that coming first. Yeah, I can completely relate to that. Dr. Bob Gill, would you relate to that as well when it comes on, or are things slightly different from your perspective when it comes to the NHS?
No, I would agree with what's been said. I think the problem we have is the public don't actually understand the historic perspective of how we've ended up in our current predicament. What we've had is 40 years of neoliberalism, which dismantled the post-war consensus. So from the end of the war till the late 1970s, we had investment in public services, we had social housing, we had all those investments made which would improve the lot of the average working man and his family. But all of those have been gradually removed, and we were sold the fantasy of the free market suddenly raising every boat, but that didn't happen. And it was never meant to happen. This was a ruse, this was a fairy tale to persuade us to abandon what the nation had built up and to allow the global financial elite, the corporations, and the politicians as well to enrich themselves and hoard wealth, have a wealth distribution program to enrich the super rich, ending up impoverishing the 99% and making vast fortunes for a billionaire class that have also persuaded us that the people to blame are the people at the bottom of the pile. So people need to understand that this hasn't happened overnight. We mustn't fall for the obvious trick of scapegoating migrants and the most vulnerable. And really, your party needs to get a very clear message out on the blindingly obvious things that need to be fixed, which is renationalisation of utilities, the restoration of public services. I would say renationalising the NHS, because it does not resemble, in legal terms or structures, the NHS of 1948. What we have now is a very corporatized, very bureaucratic, very fragmented, and very wasteful NHS. So those would be my priorities. The people I see in my surgery, most of them are having ailments that stem from their social predicaments, be it wage insecurity, be it poor housing, be it anxiety and depression as a result of not coping with the cost of living and the financial pressures they're under. So I think the root cause is the economic circumstances of the vast majority of the public.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it comes back to that social contract again, doesn't it? It's the knock-on effects that affect everybody. If everybody's lives are made that much harder through the wages being repressed, of course they're going to become more ill, more sick. That's more of a burden on the NHS. You defund the NHS as well. And it's just a vicious cycle that keeps going round and round and round. Where do you take this perspective next, Nico? You're muted, mate.
Maybe it's easier when I'm not muted, yeah? Sorry about that.
Oh,
I was saying, okay. I was saying, yeah, I'm glad to have heard everything I've heard. We're all talking about rights that we had, what you're calling a social contract, what Bob refers to as, I don't know if you use the term about the post-war, but basically the welfare state that we had, which involved the council house building and so on. So I think that it's really important that we talk about that a party, when it's talking to the public at large, talks about it in those terms, about things that we had that we're taking away, and has that story that Bob mentioned that a lot of people don't know about. And it reminded me of how younger students, when Jeremy Corbyn was talking about getting rid of student fees, was it not, didn't know that education used to be free. They just didn't know that. And that story has to be there. It has to be told. And I think that a lot of that stuff has been kind of taken for granted, especially the focus on austerity. That is something that began roughly when the Tory administrations happened. And the left parties talk about, left figures talk about being anti-austerity, but it's not austerity. It's more than that. It's Thatcherism, including New Labour, and which has continued to date. So, I think that it's really important to dig out that history, to make it live, to talk about the fact that it's been taken away as our story, and our right to take it back from the main parties.
Yeah, learning lessons from the past, absolutely. I want to come back to Ian's comment about leaders, and as good leaders come and then bad leaders come after them, and well, they kind of screw things up. And I say this after stalling leadership largely on a Green segment a minute ago, so I'm not being a hypocrite or anything in saying what I'm going to say. But, as you say, bad leaders come in and then they wreck the social contract. It gets ruined. We've seen years and years and years of it, going back to the 70s when everything was awful, although I was born in the 70s, so I might have a bias there too. But obviously, a lot of people these days say therefore think politics can't be trusted, and that's hardly news, is it? But after decades of mess, that's the way it goes. But whether it's, and you get instances, I think, that stand out in that respect, that people will latch onto. Hillsborough, for example, is a massive political failure. Grenfell is another one. The NHS, as both Bob and Nico have excellently laid out already. What do your party need to do to make themselves perhaps more accountable in that respect, to ensure that bad leaders can't prevail?
You come back to me on that one?
I'll come back to you on it. You gave me the idea. I'll come back to you first.
Okay, well, first off, I think, the political party needs to be bottom up. If you're going to say this is going to be a new type of party and it's going to belong to us, then it must belong to us. And I believe if you want to represent that party, then you're on a contract. A bit like being an employee. And I think their contract should be owned by the membership. So if you do get elected and you can't represent the party anymore, then your contract ends, and so does your role within that job that you had. So I believe that they then stop being an MP or stop being a councillor, and they are fully accountable to us, because at the end of the day, that is what they claim they want to represent. I believe democracy says that, you are part of an organisation that represents the interests of the membership you serve or the community you belong to. And I think that accountability means exactly that. And the contract must include those terminologies in it. I agree that if I can no longer serve the interests of the party in the way that I've wrote up to this contract, then I will step down and resign as an MP. I think that should be there. And then if they don't do it, then people can see exactly who they are and what they really are interested in. A career, not the people, not representatives. They are just about themselves. And I think that if we have that agreement from the outset, then they do become truly a democratic representative. And that's why, I went on the Crispin show the other week and talked about the need for us to control it, not 6 MPs, because we saw with the Labour Party how MPs slant, and take over control of the democratic process. And then they use their media contacts and their powerful positions in Westminster to be able to distort what's happening politically. And I think that is not good for democracy. It's not good for our communities, and it's not good for our class, which I believe is entitled to political representation.
Absolutely. Sheila, I know you're championing the bit to come in.
It's just because it's very relevant, and I agree. But for me, the thing is, it's because you mentioned campaigns and you mentioned disasters. If you look at the Hillsborough disaster, how many years, and we went through various governments where no government wanted anything to do with us campaigners. And when Grenfell occurred, a few of us went down and they were desperate to get lawyers involved. And we were like, listen, it's market forces. They're on the high street. They'll be there next month. If you want to learn from us, the first thing you must do is push to secure housing for yourselves. And also psychological treatments, because the longer you leave not attending to post-traumatic stress, the worse it is. So from a policy point of view, I think that leaders, and I suppose deep inside you hate the idea of leaders, don't you? Because you want it to be all of us, but we accept, a degree of pragmatism. And I think that people need, it is about legislation. So, we've seen kind of the notion of Hillsborough law being exploited by Keir Starmer today, disgustingly, by co-opting a couple of bereaved families. And I can just put on record the Hillsborough Justice Campaign is deeply ashamed and disassociates itself from those people who allowed themselves to be used by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party this week and last week. But it is via legislation whereby when a disaster occurs, and like Grenfell, the whole housing thing is, no, this has to be dealt with. This, yes, there needs to be an inquiry, but the first needs of these people is adequate housing. There are still people who haven't been rehoused on a permanent basis. So it has to be within legislation. And within that, if a government and a leader responds to that within a decent time frame, that's where you build trust in a leadership, where a leader is listening to what is going on, and where a leader should be listening to what's going on in the NHS and listening to those on the cutting edge, in the hospitals, in the GP practices.
I'll come on to the NHS now, because I've just lumped the NHS in with the likes of Hillsborough and Grenfell. Is it still a fair comment, given in light of what the discussion has been already, Nico?
Yeah, actually, I don't know if it's exactly what you're asking, but I think about there's decades of what's been happening to the service, and it's not something that's happened with Wes Streeting or Jeremy Hunt or whoever. It's a very long process, and it demands to have for us collectively to have a historical memory about it and to be able to bring that up. And I think that, sadly, but the survivors of events like the Hillsborough disaster and other, I think of events in Argentina, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo who would demonstrate because their children had been disappeared. Those people who have been able to hold this and keep it present, keep the memory of that alive and the justice of it alive, to a great extent, we do need that, because it is a crime, let's say, that's been committed over a very long time, but nevertheless it is a crime. So, or something that's wrong, that is illegitimate politically, that we should be bringing into the fore, bringing into the mainstream debate. So I don't know if that's what you were asking, but that's the link that I've tended to make.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a fair point, Dr. Bob. Poor leadership, poor policy over decades, as we've seen in this country, led to events like Hillsborough, like to Grenfell, and I've included the NHS and the Americanization, or the introduction of the American model, as you've put it yourself. Is that a fair comparison? Is the NHS as big a disaster as that? Is it even bigger, perhaps?
I think it's much bigger. It's a bigger scale project, and the damage is happening on a daily basis. So it's almost being normalized. We know that A&Es are overstretched. People waiting over 12 hours for an admission once decided that they need to be admitted. For every 80 of those, there's one preventable death. So you can scale that up to apply to the whole country. And we're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of preventable deaths a week. The common theme, I suppose, is deregulation and lack of accountability. So with Grenfell, we know that the fire safety rules were weakened by the Tory administration. which led directly to the cladding that was used, and the consequence was people paid for it with their lives. Within the NHS, we're seeing a similar deregulatory agenda, whereby I suppose the biggest problem at the moment is the idea of replacing highly qualified staff, for example, doctors, with non-qualified or less qualified staff. And that's actively happening within the NHS with obvious consequences. So the setup is to remold service provision in the most profitable way possible, be that using cheap equipment, cheap cladding, or cheap staff. And who pays the price? The taxpayer, who foots the bill every time, and the patients and the public harmed, and also the staff involved in providing poor services because they lack the resources. They are subjected to a moral injury as a result of working within a dysfunctional system.
Thank you. One of the things I've touched on in pretty much every segment, every panel I've hosted over the last 2 days on your show has been in relation to overcoming divide and rule and promoting unity. Now, your party wants to represent itself as the next big movement on the left. This is what is being put forward by Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana. Yet we've got so many communities now that feel like nothing has changed is because of everything that we've already spoken about, by and large. So they switch off or they drift away because they don't believe anything will change. How can your party prove in practice that politics can deliver justice? I'll come back to Bob Gill first, please.
I think there are certain themes. You know, we're constantly being manipulated by the mainstream news. A lot of our thinking and understanding is framed by information that is easily accessible. So in effect, the public are gently brainwashed and marinated into certain narratives which shape their thinking. And I don't think it's an accident that we spend a lot of time discussing identity issues or the smaller issues which I don't actually feel were generated organically or driven from a grassroots movement. And I think this is a deliberate ploy to divide progressive forces, to divide people who want the same outcomes we do. So I think your party has to be very careful not to make statements like, we don't want anybody who's socially conservative within the party. That is a recipe for disaster. We need to stick to the main issues, which are healthcare, housing, the economy, the bread and butter issues, and not get diverted in internal struggles over smaller issues. We should respect everybody's human rights. Everybody's treated equal under the law, and avoid the pitfalls that are being set for us to divide us, to distract us, and to destroy any prospect of gaining any significant influence in how the country's run.
Nico, can I come to you on that next?
Yeah, I mean, if this is, I think, very comparable to what Bob has said, but what my sense is that we have had, well, first of all, he mentioned accountability. We've had several political parties, the main political parties for decades now, who all believe in not having a welfare state, these rights that we acquired after the war, and a population that continues to believe in those things to the extent that people like Nigel Farage or whoever pay on the right, throughout all the right, West Streeting, all the right, pays lip service to that constantly because the population supports the idea of, you know, everybody having somewhere to live and so on and so on. And so, but we have to be able to, but it's only the left that can actually defend those things. So in terms of accountability, a problem has been that the two main parties have not held each other accountable on these issues because they've agreed with each other on these issues for a good quarter century. So we haven't had that. That's why Jeremy Corbyn's opposition, when it came in, suddenly caused a lot of trouble because he was opposing things that would not have been opposed before, and they're not being opposed afterwards in Parliament, you know, in a significant way, and that was a significant problem. And that's why they managed to get so many things changed to just being in opposition, because they were actually saying something about it, whereas before they had a free ride, either the Tories or Labour, from the others. So Sorry, I'm losing my thread very slightly.
That's fine, mate. I'll move on from there. That's absolutely great. Ian Hodson.
I mean, listen, how people choose to live their lives is surely up to them. I mean, it's not for political debate. I mean, people identify how they feel they want to identify, and I respect their right to live the life that they wish to lead. And I think that's what being human is all about. So I don't think we have to overburden ourselves. We recognise that, you know, if we're saying we're inclusive, we recognise that that means being inclusive. If we feel that people should be excluded, then we can't say we believe in inclusivity. If there are some people more equal than others, that's not equality. You know, so for me, the issues are, you know, I said this before, you know, if you're from Poland, from Pakistan, or from Preston, right? If you're fighting to improve your wages and you do it together, you are more likely to win. If you try and do it separately, then you are more likely to lose. When we recognise solidarity means all of us, and collectivism is how we as a class win, then I believe we can start to build the future that we all deserve. And I think that, to me, is more important than saying, you know, we can make statements in support of this group or that group or this you know, community or that community. And we can do that, and we can allow the right to continuously control that situation. But, you know, if you're a transgender and you're homeless, if you're a veteran and you're homeless, you know, if you're black or white or you're an immigrant and you're homeless, then that's politics that's failing because there's no decent homes available. And what we need to do is we need to build the homes so people have somewhere to live, not so we can divide ourselves over not having them and who is more deserving. And I think that's what politics should be about. And I think that's what inclusion should be about. We don't do it by words, we do it by actions, and we do it by deeds.
Fantastic. 2 minutes to go. I'll give the last word to you, Sheila Coleman.
Yeah, I just think that it's important that somehow we find a way to make your party work, call it what you want, whoever is at the forefront of it, because, you know, in working class communities in this city, or traditionally working class communities, reform are chomping at the bit, and they are making inroads. They're making inroads. You see a growing sectarianism, not just in Liverpool. You see it over in the 6 counties in Ireland, once again, where people are latching onto things. Some of those people would have been out on the steps of St George's Hall a few years ago supporting Jeremy Corbyn. There's a whole load of disaffected communities, and if we don't step in and do something, Reform are there, they will do it. And so I think, you know, we talk about social responsibility, and we have a social responsibility to make this work, even if it means knocking quite a few good heads together.
Knocking a few good heads together, I think, is a fantastic place to end this conversation on, isn't it, in light of recent events when it comes to your party? Here's hoping some of them are tuning in and listening and thinking, yes, this unity and this solidarity and this collectivism business, that sounds like a rather good idea, doesn't it? Funnily enough, Ian, you mentioned being on Crispin's show the other day, and the legend that is Crispin Flintoff is here, and he's on next. So thank you very much to my guests, and I'll leave you in his capable hands.